Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Review 822. Today's going to be a little bit different of a review. I'm going to be talking about this game, Gamma Wolves. This was published by Osprey Games, who also did stuff like Frostgrave, Stargrave, things like that. This is also published by Ash Barker, who has a YouTube channel and has several videos about the game that he's designed. And I will put links to that below, or probably to a playlist or something of his videos. And he does some Let's Plays and stuff like that. The reason I'm into this game is because I started collecting Gundams about a year ago. And you might have seen them up here on the shelf. You don't see any right now because they're on the table. And I was like, man, there's got to be a way to play a miniatures game with these Gundam models, which are really awesome. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So this is definitely a review of Gamma Wolves, but from sort of the prism of using Gundams. Now, you don't need Gundams for that, for the game. You could do all kinds of different robots. They give you some suggestions in here. And there's some great painted, robotic type miniatures in the book as well. But as I was getting into the Gundam thing, it wasn't that long after I'd maybe built two of the things or something like that, they announced, oh, they're doing a Gundam miniatures game. Bandai is doing that. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. That's exciting. And I was like, wait, they're doing different models? I mean, they could use their models. I can see why they wouldn't. I mean, it makes sense. Like, you've got these, relatively intricate and complex construction, depending on the grade that you get, models that aren't necessarily great to move around the table. They're kind of like you build them and you leave them alone. But they're not that bad to move around the table. I'll talk about that here. And then they're making that game. So I'm kind of interested in that game. Kind of, I mean, we'll see when it comes out, but it looks like it's kind of like Warhammer Underworlds. It's like a little simple hex-based game and stuff like that. So it looks, whatever. I don't know how it's going to look. But I really wanted to play a miniatures game with these Gundams because I'm really into building these models. I got about a dozen of them here that I'll show you. And not just Gundams, but like basically the whole Gunpla Bandai line, and maybe even some others. I've only built some of the Bandai ones. But anyway, we'll talk more about that in a second. And then I went through, a little bit more preamble here, I went through several games. Not quite 10 games, but I was kind of weeding through the internet, trying to figure out, somebody must have come up with a way to play Gundams with this, whether it was like Battletech or Adeptus Titanicus or something like that from Games Workshop. And, also in addition to playing or building the Gundams, I've also been watching like the cartoons and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, this is not really like the Gundam is not like a Battletech vibe. Like, it is a totally different kind of thing. There are some similarities, but and I was especially watching Universal Century, which is like the original stuff, the original movie, and Origin, and Char Aznavour, and Amuro, and all those guys. And I watched a bunch. I watched Zeta, ZZ, all that stuff. And none of it was really like vibing with, any sort of game or situation that I could see. Because especially Universal Century was kind of like Jedi in Gundam suits, so to speak. But I started the other day watching Iron-Blooded Orphans, and I'm like, okay, that sort of vibe. Now, I'm not going to apply that directly to this, but that sort of just put me mentally, like creatively in my imagination in the kind of right kind of mind space to kind of come back to this one. Because I've had this book for like a year now. And then I started kind of looking at other ones. So just a couple that I'll mention now that look pretty cool, but to me, this is like, if there was like this is a stupid thing to say, but if there was like a definitive game that I think you should play with your Gundams, I think it would be Gamma Wolves. I did see some stuff that I liked. There's a bunch of stuff I didn't like. It was just like, I don't want to disrespect anybody, but it was just like, just stuff on some dude's Google hard drive, you know what I mean? But one that just came out, which kind of re-triggered me, is called Chrome Rangers. I'll put links to this one below. That's a print and play. That one's actually like a one-on-one dueling kind of thing with mechs or Gundams or whatever you want. And it's pretty cool, like for that. I mean, I have it, and I went through the rules and kind of played around with it a little bit. It's kind of like a card dueling game in a way. I'm like, that's pretty cool. That's not kind of what I'm looking for. And then there's another one, which is about 10 years old or so, called Samurai Robots Battle Royale, which has a lot of cool stuff in it. I'll put a link to that below. That one is more of a like a Blood Bowl style game where you are rolling not to fumble, not to fail. And so you're activating the different body parts of your Gundams. And that one you can play like a 1-on-1 game, or, you know, like 3-on-3, or however it kind of works. And it looks pretty cool, but it's not quite a full-featured miniatures game. And, you know, it looked like it could have gone somewhere, and there's like an add-on to combine that with like Godzilla monsters and kaiju and stuff like that, which, you know, whatever, that seems all right. But then I always kept coming back to this one. And this one has a really cool mechanic too. It's kind of a Dead Zone, Kings of War, Vanguard type of thing, kind of a mantic feel to it, to some of the mechanics, which I think work really well here, just as a little bit of a spoiler. And so let's just go down to the table. I'll talk about kind of the Gundams and sort of the, you know, the experience of like building the armies, so to speak, with the Gundams, and kind of how that works, and then how that kind of maps right into how the game sort of has you set up for deployment even, and, you know, how you kind of build and construct your different, it calls them arcologies. They're like different factions. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the theme of the game, which, like, again, if you're a Gundam person, you'd be like, okay, this is more of an Iron-Blooded Orphans type of vibe than a Universal Century type of vibe. But and I know there's a whole bunch of stuff. I'm not like a big Gundam expert, but you can kind of see that. And I also have some Macross Bandai figures too, because I'm actually more of a Macross Robotech guy at heart. And I bought a bunch of those, 3 of those. So anyway, let's take a look. So we'll just start with a kind of an idea of the scale of these things if you're not familiar with them. So I've got a Mega Gargant there and a regular Gargant. And most of the Gundams are a little bit bigger than a regular Gargant, and not quite as big or as a Mega Gargant, except for this guy here. So there's different grades of Gundams. Everything that you see here I've got out on the table is a high grade, an HG. This guy is a master grade. And what those are is it's a certain scale that they fit. So if you have an entry grade or a high grade, then those are 1/144. I think that's like 15 millimeter, something like that. And then the master grades are a little bit bigger. These are 1/100, and these are like a 10 millimeter type of thing. Now, so that brings up the idea of scale, which we'll get to in a minute. But I just wanted to show a couple of things. So one of the things that Gamma Wolves has in it is this idea of deployment, and these are contact markers. So I'll try to put a link to these. I think I got these on sale, but it was like $8 for 10 of these. And these I think are 120 millimeter just bases. And so when you deploy, you're actually going to put these out first. And I frankly haven't seen this really matter too much, because as soon as somebody on your opponent's side has line of sight to your contact marker and they have line of sight to each other, then you replace them, you know, with, you know, one of your figures here, like so. Okay. So it's just used for deployment. And I could see if you got a really dense board, then it might be more useful. But frankly, just in terms of maneuvering, I mean, it kind of depends on what models. If you're not using Gundam, it's not a big deal. But if you had a really densely packed, like Frostgrave level density of terrain, then yeah, the contact markers would come into play. And it's actually kind of a cool thing, because it kind of gives you sort of a last minute decision point of like which, you know, model to put down, in a sense. You can get these bases here, and these are kind of like reusable. So if I pop this guy off of here like so, so this is one of the Zaku guys. So this here is a base that you can then pull this out of, and you can pack these away, and these are kind of like little 2-part things. And I think they're kind of expensive as you know, bases go, because they're like $10 or so. I think I got some on sale for $8 one time. But you can reuse them, right? So I can take this off and put this other guy. So if you're thinking of it in terms of from a gameplay perspective, you just need a handful of them, and then you can swap them out onto, you know, other models. So you don't need like one base for each model, which would get quite expensive. Now the Gundams themselves are pretty cheap. I think most of these cost me around $20 to $25, except for the big master grade. He was about 50 or 60. And then these Robotech or Macross, if you're being technical about it, these are about 50, because I think they're kind of a special limited thing. And these will actually like transform. If you're familiar with Robotech, I just keep saying Robotech because people in the West know it from that usually. But these will actually transform. Now they're not like Transformers where you can like just kind of do it. You have to like kind of take it apart and build it back together. But you can see how they have kind of like jet profiles and stuff. And this guy, he plays music, and which is awesome. But I don't want to get on a tangent. So these are like $50, and I think these are technically master grade. I don't know. They're like an extra high grade or something. They're like a slightly different scale, just very slightly. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think you could play this in a few different ways of scale. Now this particular game, I'm going to set him up there, see if he falls down. There we go. This particular game here is set up to be sort of like the 28mm scale. And I don't think it looks too far off in this sort of environment here. Technically, it kind of depends. Like sometimes, you know, especially me when I watch like a Macross cartoon or something, and I'm like, how big are these things? Because it's like, oh, they're about 2 stories high, or they're like half a Godzilla size. You know, kind of depends on how the thing goes. But if you think about it, just for a reference point, in the real world, these turn into fighter jets, right? So if you figure, if you stood a fighter jet on its backside and probably squished it down a little bit as it transforms and the nose comes down, it's probably 2-3 stories tall, okay? So the scale of it, like if you're being really precise about it, is probably wants to dictate, instead of this kind of 28mm, you know, Warhammer whatever style terrain, it really dictates playing with like, you know, Epic or Adeptus Titanicus style terrain. But I think you could kind of go either way with this, and I think as far as gameplay works, it works just fine with this kind of normal terrain. And that was one of the reasons I really kind of, you know, was a boon for this one, was it kind of fit, you know, the terrain that I already had. I didn't have to go buy like $200 worth of, you know, buildings and stuff to, you know, to make it work. So the other thing that's cool about this is you can see here with this guy, let's just get a close-up of him. So these are like Principle of Xeon guys, or Zaku's. So you can see he's got a shield, he's got an axe, but you can also equip him with this little kind of machine gun type of activity here. And I have little baggies in a box here of other little equipment and stuff. So you can very easily, you know, like pop off his hand, right? And then you have maybe another item that's a gun or something that you could pop in there. And so as far as the build quality goes, like this one's great. Like this stuff is not going anywhere. But one thing to keep in mind there is some of these, like this is one of the first ones that I bought, are like a little bit sort of flimsy. Like I've got this one where I like. So as far as like picking these up and moving them around, you might have stuff that falls off, which in terms of gameplay can be a little bit of annoying. But it kind of also depends on like the model. So when I get these models, one thing I've started doing, and I'll put a link to this store. I don't have any affiliation with the store. It's a USA Gundam store. Now, I bought them from other places too. But one thing I really like that they do, and others do as well, is they'll have reviews of the models. Kind of like, you know, when you're buying something from Amazon, there'll be reviews of it from the customers that have bought it, and they'll verify it, and they'll have pictures of the person that actually, you know, spend time building the model and stuff. And they'll talk about like a lot of times how flimsy it is, you know, because maybe you'd be put on, and this is like its arm keeps falling off anytime I sort of breathe on it. So that's something that you could keep in mind. And really, I haven't had an issue with any of these except for this guy here, because he has this little like claw that comes out of his arm, which is awesome. But it just like, it's very floppy. So, you know, it's not super great. But other than that, honestly, these are really good. And you can sort of get into, I think I got in a little bit of detail with this guy since he's a master grade, just from a hobbyist perspective. Let me just set him up. Now I set a few up because I didn't really get too much with the lining on this guy. But there's a lot of stickers here. You can see there's a little line here, and this guy got a bunch of lines and drawing, that kind of stuff. So it's like, you know, panel lining and all that kind of stuff. I didn't get too crazy with it. Just kind of played with it a little bit. But you, if you're a hobbyist, now I've seen some really cool stuff where people, you know, they get these, and so you have kind of a base coat, if you will, on your model, and then they go in and they weather them and they do all kinds of stuff to them. So it kind of is nice because it serves two purposes. If you just want to kind of build the model, which is super awesome, building these is so much more fun than building a Warhammer model. Now it's just the building part of it. it just is very, very pleasurable, especially as you kind of maybe work your way up to building like a master grade or even like a perfect grade or whatever the other grades are. The perfect grades are like, probably twice the height of this one. And it's just a very nice experience, and the instructions are great. But if you're somebody that's like, I'm going to get into this or play this or whatever, I want to be able to do paint on it. I've seen some great stuff and some just stuff that is like, man, they spent hours and hours and hours painting on top of it, or even just totally repainting in the whole thing. You can totally do that. And like this guy here is my favorite guy that I've made so far. And like you can see, I just went and touched up his little gun rocket ship there, and kind of drew a little bit on his face. Just like tiny bit, but just little accents like that like really sort of help it. Like there's little marks like that, and you'll see how it is. But it's just a nice little touch, to make the models look just a little bit nicer. And there are quite a bit of stickers on some of them, like the master grade, and then like these Macross ones here. There's a lot of sticker work kind of going on this thing. So depending on how you feel about that, you could also like not do the sticker, because there's been a couple of moments where I'm like, I don't want to do the sticker. It's too like intricate and delicate. And then I come back to it later and I usually get it done. But that is a part of the process as well. Okay, so enough about the models and things. So let's just talk very quickly about the in-game mechanics, which are very, very simple. A lot of your time and fun is going to be spent, sort of building and constructing your arcology or your group of pilots who are going to man your Gundams or your mechs, and also kind of loading out and outfitting all of your different robots with different stuff. Now, the basics of the game, I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, is kind of like a dead zone. So most of the roles, maybe all of the rolls, are a base 3 dice. So you're going to roll 3 dice, and then you're going to have a certain number. So depending if you have like a veteran, rookie, or trained pilot, you're going to be looking for different numbers. So I think it's a 3+ if you're a veteran. So if I roll that there, I got 2 misses and a hit there with the little Cabal snake. And then maybe I'm trying to hit somebody and they're maneuvering and they're only a rookie. So they need a 5+, I think it is. So we're going to roll that. And so they got 2 successes there. And so 1 to 2, nothing happens. But if we had more successes than the Dodger in the opposed roll there, we're going to take those excess successes and apply that as a multiplier to our damage. So let's say the weapon that we chose had 2 damage. So if we had 2 successes over and above the defense, then we'd multiply that damage by 2, so that would be 4 damage. And then one thing that you're going to do is you're going to roll to see where on the robot it hits. So you might hit sensors, you might hit different hard points where you have like guns effectively mounted, all kinds of different spots. And then if you want, you can actually spend successes, if you've got a whole bunch of extra successes, to kind of zero in and like move up and down the parts chart, and then say, oh, I'm actually going to hit this particular weapon or something like that, try to disable that, or disable I keep thinking of the word propulsion system and stuff like that. So, and that's basically what it is. And so you just do an opposed roll there. If you're doing a melee action, you're actually going to roll your maneuver, and so on. So that's the very basic part of the tests and how that's going to work. Now you're also going to want a handful of tokens here. So I've just got some yellow and red ones. So you're going to have reactor stress, and I use the red ones for that, and you're going to have pilot stress. So when you take different actions and you do like offensive maneuvers and stuff like that, you're going to start to add stress to the pilot itself. Whereas if you do other abilities and basically move the mech around, and it also, depending on the loadout of the mech, you're going to start to add stress to the actual frame itself, because that's what these are called in terms of the gameplay. These are different frames. So you're going to have light frames. So maybe this smaller guy here is a light frame, this bigger guy here might be a heavy frame, and this one here might be a medium frame. You can kind of just play with that. Effectively, it in a sense doesn't matter which frame that you choose, because this as an example here. So we have a light frame offensive loadout. So you've got all these different weapons you can put in. And then you have the same exact weapons for medium and heavy, but here's the kicker. If we take a look here, let's just use the anti-tank as an example. So anti-tank on a light frame gives you 1 bonus dice. So you roll your 3 base dice plus a bonus dice, does damage 3. Here's your range, here's the weight, because each of these has kind of a weight threshold that you have to meet. And so the lighter can't carry as much. And then here's the materiel cost. So when you build, for every mission that you do, you have a 500 cap, which I really like this part, is because it just, you're never going to run with like an insane amount of stuff, because it's a world that is, you're trying to scrape by, and you have to be frugal about what you're doing. So this is material cost here. So anti-tank, 1 bonus dice, 3 damage weight. So if we jump over here, anti-tank missile, material cost 30, 15. But then if we look here like at the energy, so it does 2 damage here, 2 bonus dice on a heavy, this is a heavy, and 5 damage with 25, where like on the medium, you have 2 bonus dice, same, but only 4 damage, and then it's actually 1 inch shorter of the range with the energy melee weapon, and then it's actually a little cheaper as well. So that's the thing you have to kind of run and consider. So you don't have to get too crazy with that. And then you've also got other loadouts here. These are technical loadouts. So if you wanted to represent like the shield, some of these guys that have shields, I just use a blade of armor and just kind of apply that as it goes. And there's a couple other things, heat sinks and stuff like that to help. Now the other thing you might want are some objective markers, and you can use just little tokens or whatever, but I just have these little prime pieces from like Kill Team or something that I put out on the board. And when you gather those, because a lot of the missions are about sort of giving salvage, and then I use other little tokens off to the side there just to throw on there as they pick them up, and so they'll be carrying that load. And so you will have sort of penalties and stuff like that if you kind of go over a certain your sort of maximum weight threshold. And so that's what the objective is, to recover those. And you have kind of an in-between game, sort of campaign phase where you can go and sell them kind of like at the barter town or something like that, because it's a very post-apocalyptic type of vibe here. So that's kind of the objective of the games. But the other thing that is going to sort of dictate sort of the victory condition, or the end game almost, I should say, is after you've gone back and forth, you have kind of a maneuver phase, which you can kind of overwatch or snap fire, as you move in and out of line of sight. But again, all of these things are going to incur stress on either your pilot and or your mech itself. And that's important, because after you do the maneuver phase, you're going to have a gunnery phase where you just kind of open up all your weapons. You can use each weapon once, and depending again on the size of the frame, you can add more stuff. So a heavy frame will have what they call 2 primary hard points and 2 secondary hard points. Actually, it's better if we just visualize this. So 2 primary, 2 secondary. So you have a left and right primary, a left and right secondary, and here you can see the damage boxes for it. Where, as we take here, look at a medium, 2 primary and 1 secondary here, and then the light down here is just have 1 of each, right? So that's what you can take with you. So then you can fire all those different things, and you can try to target all those different things. But every time you do it, you think, I'll just load everything up and do the 500 max, because you have what's called a cooldown phase. And if we take a look here, so we've got this example here, you've got your maneuver, I think this is a rookie. Yeah, so you've got maneuver and gunnery, and this is for like dodging and melee for shooting, and then your technical skill there. And so you're going to roll, and then you're going to get bonus successes here. So you can see here, if you're doing a light frame, you get 1 automatic success, medium 2, heavy 3. So based on the number of successes, you can remove X amount of reactor stress from your frame. But every time you do that, every time you remove that stress, you're going to count down what's called the war clock. And most of the time that's 40 for each side. And so once you're at 0, effectively all of your mechs will deploy or bail, because let's say they run out of ammo, they run out of like energy or gasoline or whatever that might be powering them, and they've got to bail. And then if you have your opponent still has figures on the board, they're going to gobble up all the rest of those tokens, which again you turn in, and you sort of either bank them, spend them for extra cash to get different upgrades, or roll for an upgrade table, that kind of thing. Or you can sort of, if you're playing a campaign, like return them as almost like a tithe to your faction, to your arcology, and that gives you, I think it's called arcology survival points, and you can play a campaign up to like X number of points, like say 20 points. But so you've got to manage that and that war clock ability. And so that's why you go, oh, okay, so if I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff, I want to do smart stuff. I don't want to just unload all of my guns and weapons every single time, because I'm gonna burn right through all of my thermal reacting power and all that stuff. And so that's where this kind of check war clock phase comes into play there. So yeah, after players will, do whatever the objective is. I think there's 6 scenarios in here. Then you come back and then you can swap out pilots into different mechs and that kind of thing, because you have veteran pilots, rookie pilots, trained pilots. And I didn't say, when you do a deployment, each of those ranks has a pilot value. So like a veteran is a 4, and so you can never take more than 12 pilot value in units. So and each of these has to be piloted. So that kind of balances it out as well. And so your stats and your 2 hit rolls basically get better, as they get up. And then one of the pilots, when you first build, can be an ace. So if you had an ace rookie, instead of a 5-up, it would be a 4-up, and you would get extra pilot value for that. So you can have like one like really good like Amuro or Char Aznavour type of player in there too. And then you can lose pilots and gain pilots. They can get injuries and all that kind of fun stuff, and find like rare artifacts that you can sort of add to your collection, to your crew. And then, yeah, that's pretty much the game there. Okay, so that is Gamma Wolves there. We'll do my 2 pillars of review. Normally I do 3, but player count, I've only played as 2 players. So play time, I would say about an hour, but I feel like, getting more familiar with the system, it's definitely going to come down under an hour. I don't see why it would take you that much longer. It's just like when you first get going, it's like, gosh, there's all these different things I can do, weapons and stuff like that, and should I use this? And so there can be like almost analysis paralysis in a way, but that kind of goes away. Like after your first play, once you get kind of familiarity with your machines and all that stuff, then you kind of know what'll happen. And you kind of have to like see things happen a little bit too, which is always part of these kind of games. But yeah, 45 minutes or so, maybe an hour. It's not going to go any longer than that, for like a mission, a battle. The one thing I didn't mention, moving into my last pillar, which is like, what is this game like? It's a 4x4 table, so it's your typical kind of skirmish level size table. I didn't mention that. I also didn't mention there's different types of propulsion. So you can have jets and bipedal, like walking, or tracks. And don't have any mechs or anything with tracks, and I kind of want to just play with that. So I don't know. I just want to get more of these little models here and find them. And find some funky ones and stuff like that, because they have a lot of funky, really oddball, like different mechs that you can get from not just Bandai, but like there's something Fang Dugram and stuff like that, and all those things. So I think if you were to go with the whole like toy factor part of this, and not so much with like the traditional build and paint, 3D printed models or whatever, independent models that you can get, of which there are awesome ones out there. I think you can find a lot of them and have a lot of variety here, even with these, which are all basically, standing 2-legged robots with some kind of gun and maybe a melee weapon. There's a lot of weird stuff out there that you can get into, and it just look really funky. And I think it would just add to kind of the whole just cool flavor of it, of like these kind of I don't know how to explain it, but like anachronistic almost types of things, because like I said, I've got here the Macross and the Robotech type of guys, and those guys obviously all come with jets, and Gundams basically kind of come with jets anyway, because they kind of just fly. But I mean, that you can kind of just sort of house rule. I just sort of basically house rule, like, well, no, they're not flying. They're just kind of walking around for whatever reason. Because they don't always fly. Sometimes they run at each other, for no reason. Because, they got to conserve. They got, using the jets costs a lot of energy. And so anyway, when you build a mech with jets or tracks or something like that, they incur like kind of an automatic material cost built into their frame, basically. It's like a built-in penalty, if you will, or tax, if you will. But as far as, kind of comparing this to other style of games, I mentioned it a couple of times, it's got a very Dead Zone type of vibe. And I really like that. That's such a cool sort of dice system where it's like, you know, set a pool of dice, add or remove dice based on different conditions or different weapons or, you know, whatever's going on, or if you maybe you're blocking line of sight, that kind of stuff. And then that's your sort of scaling factor, and then you're just rolling target numbers. And it makes it very easy to, you know, feel sort of the weight and impact and sort of ebb and flow of the battle without having to do a lot of math in your head. You just quickly sort of add and subtract dice, you know what you're going to roll, and then you go from there. And also, it really works for this sort of like, you know, mech Battletech type of system where you've got, you know, multiple points on your target that you're trying to attack and sort of wear down different pieces of those targets. And to me, you know, this seems obvious to say this, but like, that's what you want in this kind of game. When you're playing with robots, you want to have that sort of granularity of different systems and all that stuff. But this does it in like a really just clean, easy way. There's not a lot of complexity to this. You know, you're going to handle a lot of that complexity when you go and create your army and create your mech and your characters. And then through that first play, you're just going to go like, oh, I got this. This is not a huge deal at all. There's not a lot of extra stuff getting in the way. It also feels like a game I've only played twice, and it's been years, where it has kind of a War Machine vibe, which is kind of interesting because I never really looked. I tried like Battletech, and I think that was it. I was looking at this, and I didn't really like vibe with it or whatever. I kind of bounced off it. But I did like War Machine when I played it, and the whole like stress sort of activation point type of thing that this ends up being has that sort of vibe. And I was like, oh, you could totally just like apply this system with a lot of those War Machine, what do they call them, jacks or whatever in that game? I can't remember what it's called. But you could totally, if you just wanted to like repurpose and have like a cool, fun campaign and kind of reuse those type of models, I think War Machine stuff would work really cool. And it should feel very familiar to you if you've played that kind of game. What was the other game they did that was kind of like that? Oh, they didn't do it. It was somebody else. It was called Guild Ball, where if you've ever played Guild Ball, which they killed, who did that game? Anyway, so he had that sort of action point allocation thing where you kind of stack up action points in different places. And sometimes on your turn, just like in this game, you might like I might leave this guy kind of alone and sort of recover or kind of just lie in wait and have that sort of interesting sort of tension points sort of bouncing around the table. That's what I really like, where a lot of these games, you kind of like are just always moving, always doing something. You don't often like kind of wait in, you know, you do sometimes, but this one just, it feels a little bit more pronounced to me, where you're kind of like, oh, I'm chilling with this guy over here. I'm kind of waiting over here, and I'm going to do some snap fire and then maybe try to pick the opportunity to rush in. And because, oh, the other thing I didn't mention, I knew I was going to forget to mention this, is the arcs. So one of the cool things about having these bases here, if I can take this guy off, let's see. He's on there pretty good. Just give me 1 second there. Yeah, here we go. So these bases, I'm just going to hold up, are this sort of, you know, diamond shape. So in the game, like for example, one of the special abilities of one of the factions I used, if a leader or veteran had a lock on a rookie, that rookie would get extra bonus points. But you always had to take a rookie with you on your deployments, because that was like their sort of, I think it was called like a progressive kind of ethos. I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool sort of handicap. Like you've always got to bring a rookie, but if you keep their sort of mentor in line, that rookie's going to get a little bit of a bonus. And so the idea of being sort of in their front arc, in their line of sight, that creates a lock, and that's what you're trying to look for. And so you get different bonuses if you're in the left or rear arcs or the side arcs and all that kind of stuff. So that will again add to the pool of dice. And these sort of diamond shaped bases actually work just really well, because you know these models can be all like pointed different ways, and so because you can pose them. And so if you're like, okay, well, he's looking this way or doing this, but like you're like, oh, you can just make them in a cool pose, and then you can look at that sort of diamond shape, you know, arc type of thing, just to, you know, as you and your opponent agree on sort of the reference points for all those things. And it works just perfectly for this. I was really excited when I started playing with this a little while ago, and I was like, oh, these bases are just totally perfect. Like, you don't even need those bases I showed you before. You can just, because like I said, you just detach these and then you just plump the guy right in with the little arm and stuff. And then, you know, you can pose them all up and stuff. And that's just pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I can't recommend this enough. Like I said, I'm kind of interested in the Gundam miniature game that's coming out. I'm not really sure how to feel about it. It feels more like a board game, which isn't a bad thing. But for if I'm doing miniatures combat, I want like a miniatures game. I want terrain and stuff. And I just think these models are so cool and fun to put together that it's like, oh, you know, I'm a gamer type of guy. So I'm just like, cool, the model's on the shelf, you know, just sitting there. I want to push it around and shoot stuff with it. And so this is really just a cool thing. I mean, the cover price on here is like 30 bucks, okay? I know you can get it cheaper than this. I'm sure I bought it cheaper than this because these things go on sale all the time. Check out Osprey's site. I'll put a link to it. I know it's up on there. It might be up on the Amazon, other places like that. But if you go look for it, it'll be around. And it is definitely, if you got a bunch of Gundams laying around and you like miniature games, this is definitely money well spent. And I think it is, like I said, kind of comparing it to some of the others that are out there that I saw people recommending and talking about. This one's great because it in two parts, because the system is good, you know, the combat, everything is very simple and elegant. The building of the models and the characters and stuff is a lot of fun. Like, it's intricate enough, but it's not crazy complex. And then it has, you know, the elements there for a campaign and for growth and leveling up and experience and, you know, each of the kind of different arcology faction stories, they don't really sort of have a one-to-one relationship to any factions like in the Gundam universe at all. I mean, kind of like I said with the Iron-Blooded Orphans, like I get that vibe. So now, having watched that show a little bit, it just puts me in the right mental space to come at this and say like, oh, well, maybe this is another faction on the other side of Mars or whatever, you know, in the context of that universe. Or it's some, you know, other Spacenoid faction out of Jupiter or something that is landing here and we're all fighting over Mars or something like that. You know, it gets enough of the juices going that it makes it really engaging, and you can kind of just, you know, be creative with it in your own head about it. So anyway, I highly recommend it. Take a look. Thanks.